in this episode of the Critical Oxygen Podcast.
You said zone 2 because it's volume.
Mm-hmm.
Volume is what's important. And in order to consume the volume, you need to lower the intensity.
Yes.
And so that's where the zone 2 comes in.
Yes.
Right?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Critical Oxygen Podcast, where we help you optimize your physiology and maximize your athletic potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson, and today we're joined by continuing guest host, Dr. Robbie Jacobs, where we're going to talk about exercise economy and efficiency. Robbie, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Dr. Batterson. It's good to be back. I need to do that with my voice like you do that.
Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for having me back. I'm terrible. I'm terrible.
I'm working on my NPR voice.
You're getting good. I'm
yeah.
terrible. But I also don't know if I could even take myself seriously.
Yeah, it's a little bit back and forth. I try to keep the inflection up, keep it entertaining for people, keep it rolling,
but you're a podcast host, right? I would be a poser. And so if I'm trying to do it, then I would look and sound like a poser.
No, but you're a continuing guest host. So, but also I do have now, this is my 31st, practice plus the 50 or like the 20 or so episodes that were recorded for oxidative potential.
Well, and then all the other things that you just record, right? To put out. I mean, you have a lot. I have ever since COVID, I do a lot of recording for classes.
Mm-hmm.
It's brutal. I enjoy talking to somebody, but just like talking into the abyss, right? When you're trying to keep it entertaining and exciting. I didn't realize how much I feed off of somebody else's energy. And oh my gosh, just hours upon hours. I think altogether, I can't remember how many hours of lectures, but it's brutal. And you do it a lot. So kudos. Yeah,
it's in a lot of the stuff that I do is I write a script for myself.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, try to
for
make
every podcast.
No. So podcasts are completely off the cuff. I'll have questions and
when
stuff,
you're
but
teaching.
I'm saying, for either teaching or for my Instagram stuff, it's generally a script, and that just makes it so much easier. Just because then you can be succinct.
Right.
You don't get caught up in the
I should do that. Right.
So yes, I make it a point, especially on social media, to be more concise and more succinct by having a script.
So you write everything out rather than just bullet points. You write out. Okay. I would need to learn how to read like a teleprompter.
That's actually what
talk.
I do.
Right.
Yeah. And it's tough, but I'm sure you could use something like ChatGPT to be here's what I think the script should be. Make this sound more conversational, right?
Oh, totally.
Actually, I haven't even done that yet, but that's a great idea for me. And that's another thing we need to talk about at some point. This isn't a technology podcast, but the use of maybe ChatGPT for physiology stuff and
oh my gosh,
like that'd be super fun.
It's a great resource for sure.
It's really cool, and Dr. Jacobs and I talk a lot about it offline, and how we can use it and other things like that. But guide us back. Let's talk today about exercise economy and efficiency. It's one of the 3 predictors of endurance performance. I think it's one of the more underappreciated ones because it's harder to measure. So first I'll just start with the definition. So exercise economy is the amount of oxygen per wattage or oxygen per unit speed. And it gives you how much metabolic energy does it cost to run at a certain speed, to ride or cycle at a certain speed or a certain power output or intensity. If we think about efficiency is how much energy does it cost to maintain a certain exercise intensity. So slightly different definitions. One of them just uses oxygen. The other one takes into account both oxygen and carbon dioxide to then figure out what your energy expenditure is. But it requires a metabolic cart to be able to measure that. And I mean, you and I both know metabolic carts can be pretty expensive. There are some more portable ones that are out, like face mask based devices that are, I say more affordable, but they're still $5,000 to $7,000 depending on where you go. So it just, there's big limitations in terms of the ability to measure economy. So I think that's part of the limitation to the appreciation of it.
Yep. And when you hear me talk about economy or efficiency, I'll use them interchangeable, because the nuance separating like oxygen use versus like kcals or joules,
Mm-hmm.
that's lost on me. I have too much up in the old noodle, right? My RAM is all taken up. And so I don't have room to remember nuances that literally don't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of the times people do just talk about oxygen cost, because I think it's really the easiest. Yeah.
Right.
The easiest way to do it.
And oxygen cost, because it's inherently referring to aerobic metabolism,
yes,
which is the predominant, part of human metabolism in which we are deriving 99+% of ATP, especially over time. And so, yeah, a term like that, the oxygen cost, same thing. It helps somebody understand what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's this idea, I think, of oxygen cost at certain intensities. I mean, it was identified a while ago, but the portion where it started to stick out to me was, I think running economy and efficiency is super important,
right?
Because there's so much that goes into translating the energetic cost, like the bioenergetic cost of running, to translating that to mechanical energy. And you could be have poor form, you could not be strong enough, your tendons might be lax, you might have a million different factors that could be negatively affecting your economy. And that would then, bring your ability to translate that chemical energy that's being produced for muscle contraction to truly speed or power output. And I say speed and power output because in general, running, you're going to be measuring speed, because we don't really have a reliable power meter. Stride is actually pretty usable now, and it's actually kind of fun to see your power meter on your power on your watch while you're running. But in general, we measure running with speed, and then in general we measure cycling with power output. So that's where it's just the exercise intensity. That's the big thing.
When running, or when discussing running, is there an average economy, efficiency, or oxygen cost? Actually, I'm looking for a percent. So maybe something like gross efficiency.
Oh, I don't
know. Do you have some understanding of where the human efficiency is with running?
I know they say
it changes. I know it's variable. It's a dynamic measure, and it goes up with intensity to a certain point where then I think it may even start to come down.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason I ask is I've been converting running speed to watts, to power.
Mm.
And there are different ways in doing that. But in one way, if you could just quantify the total caloric cost of the run,
mm-hmm.
in the time that it's taken, right? You can ultimately convert that from kcals to joules, and then joules over seconds, which is watts.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait.
Yeah. No, you're
right. It is, right?
You're right. Yeah. Because it's energy expenditure per second is power.
But that's all kcals. So that doesn't define the energy or the joules, the kcals that just went into the mechanical portion, moving the body.
Right.
And so I found some things that say average is 25%. And I didn't have a lot of time to go searching through the literature. So I was wondering if that's ever come up in your talks, like when you're talking about exercise or running efficiency. Is there
I,
ever a value that comes up?
I think, at least from what I've seen in the literature, and this would be a great question for me to ask Jonah, who's a little bit more steeped into the running science right now. Most of the time, running is reported as economy, so oxygen
Right.
per. So I
It's
don't.
not even a percent.
No, it's like,
Right.
however milliliters per kilometer per
Yep.
minute or something
Right.
like that,
Yep.
right? So yeah, running is challenging, and what you want to do is you want to minimize that oxygen cost of running a certain speed. So so Andy Jones wrote a really cool paper about, I think, was Brett on this paper as well, the 2 hour, like the physiology of a 2 hour marathon.
Yes. Yep.
So really, really good paper for individuals that want to go check that out. But what they determined is they needed to determine what the running economy needed to be in order to actually run a sub 2 hour marathon. And I can't remember the exact number that they came out with, but it was the oxygen cost at, I think, like 20 kilometers an hour, or like,
21.1 kilometers per hour.
Jeez. Yeah. So you
or
needed
5.86 meters per second.
Jeez, 21.1 kilometers per hour. So they came up with a number, and that kind of gives us an idea. Like, so what you really should be doing is you should be saying, okay, how is my economy trending over time? Because like, economy is going to be different for, we see people with really high VO2 maxes that generally have lower economy. Maybe that's because they just use more energy and that's how they make up for it, right? But if we're training, we want that economy to, I guess, to be improving by going down. That would be, what it is. And it's not only training by going, or not improving by going down, it's going down at the speed that you're going to be racing. And this is something that I was thinking about. So when we measured cycling efficiency and cycling economy for my study that I did during my master's degree, we did at really, really low exercise intensities. And
For some, it was hard, right? For
yeah.
some, because the absolute intensities we did were 50 watts and 100 watts.
Mm-hmm.
And for some who maybe had like a peak power output in the 400s or low 500s, that's practically nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But then we would have some participants that would have a watt max of like 140 or 50.
Right.
And it would be really difficult because we were interested in getting the absolute and the relative. So for the relative efficiencies at the same relative workload, that's easy. But
Mm-hmm.
the same absolute, it's really difficult. And so I was just discussing this with my former PhD advisor, Karsten Lundby, over this past summer, because we're working on publishing some data where they had collected efficiencies at the same relative workload. I have to really kind of sit and think about it. However, efficiency changes with intensity.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody's
and
running at
linear.
the same relative workload.
Right.
And so it's difficult for me to apply the information received for cycling efficiencies at the same relative workload versus the absolute workload. And so there's lots of nuance that further complicates our inability to measure this all that great, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, I mean, from a variable perspective, at least in the cycling world, I think you have like 3 efficiency values, right? You have gross efficiency, delta,
delta,
and then economy.
Yep.
So
yeah,
it's a little easier to measure it because you don't have, like lactate threshold of 2 millimolar, 4 millimolar, the first increase in, and I always pick on lactate just because there's 8 million different definitions, right. But you also see it in ventilatory thresholds as well.
So there's not gross efficiency or delta efficiency for running? Is that primarily just for cycling?
I think so. I mean, from what I've seen, I'm sure people have tried to quantify it before, but it's more reported, at least from what I have seen, as, just economy.
Hmm.
So it's just how much oxygen does it cost to run a certain speed. And it's, so the whole point of me asking about, like the lower efficiency or economy stuff with like the cycling is that I think we would see, because when we measured it, it's like pretty much everybody is around what, like 20 to 30% in terms of gross
Yeah.
efficiency.
Yep. Yeah. Maybe 15 gross efficiency, 15 to 20 upper 20s. Delta
Yeah.
efficiency, it's in the 30s.
Yeah. But it's really packed quite
Yeah.
close together. So, like even, we had a huge range of people come in, and, in cycling efficiency, especially at those low intensities, wasn't changing very much. But where I think you would see a delineation between individuals is when you start to get up into like, the Tour de France power outputs, right? When these individuals are maintaining 250 to 350 watts for 4 hours. And, then, I mean, then if you start to introduce durability, which we'll talk about, or resilience, well, like efficiency is probably going to change over time.
Well,
Which
and
is,
so there's just a study that just came out over the weekend or something. I've taken a screenshot. So it's pretty much most of the photos I have on my phone are either pictures of my dog or pictures of publications that
yeah, you're like,
I
I got
need
to
to
read
read.
that.
And that just came out showing that the bioenergetic efficiency, so mitochondrial efficiency in producing ATP, may be diminished with increased temperature and a drop in pH.
Mm-hmm. Which higher intensity exercise, right?
Right.
So yeah. So I mean, so certainly, right, and this is where, economy and efficiency is hard to measure, hard to quantify. And but that doesn't mean I think, like, I don't want to discourage people from trying to measure it, because another thing you could also do is just use, like measures from near infrared spectroscopy or heart rate, and just say, okay, at what heart rate or at what power output does that elicit a certain heart rate? And then that could be an efficiency value, right? Because that's an internal variable and an external variable. It's something that we need to talk about offline, because I've been starting to come, to track some SMO2 and heart rate for some step tests that I've been
Cool.
doing. And I'll show you what I'm coming away with. But yeah, I think we, to make it more accessible to people, you could see, like, okay, does this power output elicit a certain heart rate, and how is that changing over time? Because, for example, if 200 watts elicited 130 watts or 130 beats per minute, and then over time that's down to 120, whatever that ratio is, you just improved your efficiency. In a sense, you improve your performance. um so it's not quite efficiency because of the definition, but it's a pretty close surrogate. And this is where exercise physiology testing comes into play. Is you should be doing repeated physiology testing and assessment, because that's going to give you an idea of how these variables could potentially be changing. And I mean, that kind of brings us to, it's like, what has been shown to actually change economy and efficiency? Because if we can't really measure it that well, okay, whatever, we're not going to measure it. But are there ways that we could actually go about improving
Yeah. Prayer. You can pray every day. So things such as aging, and I don't know, the intimate details of this research. With age, there's experience with the sport in and of itself, which
Mm-hmm.
over time, as you become more familiar with a task or a sport, right, you become more efficient at it. Also, there are changes in time with your biology. Think about the properties of your collagen, properties of the contractile, the non-contractile elements in the muscle, that all we begin to lose flexibility, but also kind of improve at least the potential for movement economy. Yeah, force transfer for sure. But the specifics on how and what are changing.
I was trying to think of this because, I think even the meta-analyses that show, improvements to economy with different interventions don't really dive in too much to what's actually driving those changes.
Right.
And
just if changes occur like over time, right?
Yeah.
That's really what they kind of focus on.
Yeah. And, I think first and foremost, training at the speed that you're going to race. So getting specific training in that speed that you're going to try to race is above all the most important thing, as the most applicable and specific thing to improve your economy for that movement. You can gain, and we go back and forth in terms of talking about like running and cycling, but if you're, I think as a runner, we can talk about runners because I think runners stand to gain more in terms of performance if they improve in efficiency compared to cyclists.
100%. Swimmers probably too, right? Swimmers and runners for sure. Cyclists, not so much. I think with cycling, the efficiency is more about the aerodynamics, like your positioning on the bike and everything. Whereas your actual biomechanics with running and swimming really are important.
Yes. Yes. And that's exactly what I've talked to both Jonah and Aaron about is, what do you think the most important, predictor of performance is? And there's like, I think the easiest thing to improve is probably economy, especially in the beginning. And, I posted something about economy and somebody was asking, they're like, do you think that improvements in economy, like, so for example, if you change somebody's running form because you saw that they were like lean backwards or something like that, you're going to get an immediate decrement in economy, right? Because that's not the normal way that they would run. But I think over time, what would happen is the individual would adapt to the new running form, and then they would be able to increase their ceiling even higher in terms of their performance.
Have you changed your running form before?
No, not really. I haven't done any gait analysis or anything like that, and probably should. But
I probably really should. But I really wonder if I would be able to change.
I mean, we talk about it like, oh yeah, you just snap your fingers and then you change something. It's like it'd be super, super hard, especially if you've been running for for a long time. So the other question is like, well, what if you just keep running with that crappy form,
right?
And like over time, you just build volume and build fatigue resistance. Yeah, that's also going to improve your economy as well. So it's a balance, right? You could go to a form specialist and they could tell you the exact best way, to try to run. And I remember my cross country coach telling us that you should try to run with your feet straight. I can't remember like what the impetus was for it, but he was like, yeah, it's like you don't want to toe out, you want to run with your feet straight, and that's going to be the most like efficient way to run. And so that was like his cue. And so I always thought about that on my runs, like, are my feet landing straight, like other things like that. However, if you have anatomical issues or anatomical differences, I was going to say I also, so for those of you who don't know, I have a torn right hip labrum, and it's due to probably abusing my body a little bit, but I also have deformities in the femoral head, so that it's not totally circular. It's more of an elliptical shape. So every time my hip or my femur rotates through, I actually hit my labrum, and eventually that led to degradation of the labrum, and it split. So I've been trying to do a lot of like PT work and other things like that to try to get it better, but it's one of those things where I had anatomical issues with it, and that was actually causing issues with form and other things. So like when I would squat, I always have a tendency to push my knees really far forward because I don't have the ability for hip flexion. And I think that was a protective mechanism. I would try to do like pistol squats, and it was like the weirdest thing. Like one leg, I could totally do it. The other leg, which I think is the one that actually got torn, I would go down and then I would try to get back up, and it just felt like I got stuck. And it did never hurt or anything like that. It was just like, oh, I got stuck. And we never identified that as like kind of like an anatomical limitation. So there are people out there who might have anatomical limitations to changing form so that it's not, your optimal form. But if you just adapt to what your body is giving you, then you can still, by building volume, and this is where, zone 2 work and lower intensities, especially in running, can be very useful, because they can help you accumulate volume and then accumulate those longer term adaptations, maybe changes to collagen structure, maybe realignment of collagen structure, stronger tendons, better force transduction from the muscle, to the road. And it just takes a lot of time. And I think one of the anecdotal, or not anecdotal, but a study that was like N of 1, it was Paula Radcliffe over time, and her VO2 max went down as she got better, or as she aged, but her economy kept going up, and she kept running faster and faster throughout her career. So, and now apparently that world record has been broken 2 times that I've been informed now. So I was informed by Dr. Jacobs that it had been changed, or that it had fallen twice. But so I wanted to rectify that on the podcast, because I did. After you told me that, I was like, son of a gun, like I got to go and I got to look at what the actual world records are. So I did.
Pretty impressive, huh?
Yeah, no, it's crazy how fast people actually are. And
I agree
with Calvin Kiptum running 2 hours and 30 some seconds
after a bad, for him, first half of the marathon. His second half was significantly faster than the first.
Yeah, but he's been shown to like negative split the marathon most of the time, which is like really unheard of. Like that like hardly ever happens. So I'm excited to see where this guy goes. Hopefully he stays healthy, doesn't get caught for doing something below board, per se. I don't think there's any evidence to suspect that that's the case. But yeah, he's putting in a ton of mileage, and I'm sure, he's only 23, I believe. His economy is going to keep getting better over time, because he's putting in a lot of work. And I think it's volume that I think improvements in economy are really responsive to volume changes. And
see, that I like that you said that, because when you first said it earlier, you said that's what zone 2 work is good for. But lots of people hear that, do maybe 20 or 30 minutes of zone 2 work and be like, I'm working on it. But then you said zone 2 because it's volume.
Mm-hmm.
Volume is what's important. And in order to consume the volume, you need to lower the intensity.
Yes,
and so that's where the zone 2 comes in.
Yes.
Right. And also not just Kelvin tipped him, but and I'm going to mess this name up. And so if you know how to pronounce it, Phil, please correct me. But Tixt Asefa, like I think she's only 26.
Okay.
As well.
Yeah, so still relatively young in terms of marathon. Yeah.
Right. And both these records were just kind of blown out of the water this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be exciting. Fun to see how it develops. And so volume important for improving economy. I think everyone you talk to would probably agree. The more experienced individuals that you face or you see generally have better form if they've practiced it. There was also a big movement in, oh man, I might be digging myself a hole here, of like the 180 steps per minute. So that
I tried that. That on my last run. I have no idea how to quantify it.
Yeah.
But I PR'd without having to stop to dry heave. I mean, it really keeping that in mind, it keeps my pace moving. Like it keeps my pace pretty fast. I liked it. I really thought it felt good when I tried to apply it. I have no idea what my steps actually were. How do you ensure that you get that 180 steps?
So on your watch you can actually set up a metronome.
Oh, you can. Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. So you could do a metronome. There's like Spotify playlists that are like 100, like that would match that. So then you could run at that. And then you'd be getting benefits of actually listening to music as well, which has been
Right.
shown to improve performance.
Yep.
It's one of those things where I think it's not specifically, it's really, so it's a cadence of 90 RPM or 180 steps per minute. That's, because you take RPM is one revolution of your foot, whereas steps would be one, or left, right, left, right, left, right. So I don't think it's like this magical number, but what I think happens is I think a lot of people have a tendency to try to open up their stride and their gait, and then that causes them to overstride. And when you overstride, you're essentially putting the brakes on every step. And
Totally.
and by reducing that, by speeding up your cadence, you're not having that braking effect every single time that you actually take a step. So, I would be, I'm sure there's studies out there that, have actually looked at the effects of changing cadence on, force development, force distribution, other things like that. And that's probably why it came to fruition of this idea of 90. And it's the same thing in the cycling world, right? For a very long time, it was thought that 80 to 100, RPMs was kind of like the sweet spot. And now we know that self-selected cadence is actually probably better for cycling. We had some amazing athletes who would come in and their self-selected was like 70, which is like insane to me. That's so low.
Yeah.
But then we'd have others, and I mean myself included, I'm closer to that like 95 to 100. That actually feels really good for me. And I wonder if that's, a type 1 fiber, sort of.
I think so, because I can feel pretty comfortable, unfortunately, at a slow cadence. However, I've trained myself to feel more comfortable at a fast cadence. I don't know. There's something about chasing somebody that it gets my cadence up. And then when you get used to that high cadence, it feels awkward to slow it down.
Yeah.
But yesterday I just didn't want to change gears a lot. And so I just sat in a super low gear. And I think my average cadence was probably around 75, which is slow.
Yeah. But I think, again, like, it just highlights your body's like trainability, right? You're probably going to have neuromuscular adaptations to training, one cadence over another, and it's going to take a little bit of time. But once you establish that, then it's like, okay, this feels normal, for me. And there are certainly times where having a higher cadence wouldn't be as good. Having a lower cadence certainly wouldn't be as good, because especially like if we're talking about like erg mode, for example, like if you start to slow down, that cadence, you go from a point where it's like, okay, this is maintainable, to, oh, I'm slowing down, to like you're going through mud essentially. And it's because power is force per second, or energy per second. So the less force you're applying per second, the higher, that force is actually going to be in order to maintain that power. And man, it's brutal. And I know, like, so there's some people who now have been like, oh, I do slow cadence training as their, like, quote unquote strength training. And I think I said it's probably not the absolute best, for getting strong, but there's definitely a time and a place for it within training. If you're going up a hill and your gears don't go high enough and you have to go down to, say, 60 RPM, that's when it would matter, right? And if you're always training at 90 RPM and you don't have any way of switching that over, you don't have the strength to actually do it, it's going to be so brutal going up that hill. And that's kind of what I ran into when I was in Kona, is the main drive follows the ocean and the coastline for a little bit. It's kind of like undulates, and then it starts going up and then flattening out, and then steeper and then flattening out, and then even steeper and then flattening out. And you're getting away, kind of from the coast. I got to a point where, like, yeah, I was on a super light, tri bike. I was in the lowest gear and I was standing up out of it. It was so steep. And my heart rate up that hill got to, I think, 185. So it was like I hit my max heart rate. If I would have had to go any further, I wouldn't. I would have had to like stop, because I was totally maxed out in cash. So that's an example of where, that maybe that lower cadence stuff would have helped a little bit more, because, at that point I had just been riding my bike, 90 to 100 RPMs, and, hadn't developed, the ability to switch over.
Oh, I wish I could have ridden that. I bet you that was gorgeous.
Oh yeah, it was so much fun and absolutely terrifying going downhill, because I turned around and went back the same way, and I think I got up to like 40 miles an hour.
That's scary.
Yeah, it was fast, and that's like, some people who are really well trained cyclists go like 60 miles an hour.
Yeah, when they're going down the hill in the Tour de France. Oh,
Yeah.
that's nerve wracking.
Another thing that we can do in order to actually improve economy is, might sound counterintuitive, but lift heavy weights. That is, lift heavy weights and do things powerfully. And so I was just reviewing some of the literature and meta-analyses, and that's like seems to be the best way of improving economy pretty quickly. And the big, or like the bottom line is you can't go into the gym and, do what unfortunately a lot of endurance athletes do and lift very light weights for really high reps. That's kind of defeating the purpose. You're just doing endurance work more. What you need to do is you need to get down, and again, this is like all with, proper supervision, proper lifting technique, all that sort of stuff, but you need to lift above 90% of your 1 rep max. That's kind of, and that's a lot, right? So if you've been lifting, for a long time, that like it takes some effort. It is 90% for a reason. And obviously that amount of weight that you're going to be lifting is going to depend on how many reps you're actually doing. If you want to, you can do a 1 rep max. 1 rep maxes can get a little sketchy, in terms of actually being able to lift them. So what a lot of people go to is 3 to 5 reps, and that's supposed to be super heavy weight. When I used to do a lot of heavy strength training, what I would do is I would do 5 sets. I would have 2 warm-up sets. For example, if I was doing, I really like hex bar deadlift, actually. That's probably like my favorite. I think it's the most translatable to running, the most translatable to cycling, and it puts your body in a nice position that you're not super hinged over, and you can kind of play with it. So if you're looking for, kind of like one exercise that you can do for heavy strength training, hex bar deadlift, I think, would be my go-to. So you'd start out and you'd do, something really light, just like 5 to 10, 15 reps, and, just kind of go through the motion, make sure you have really good form, keeping everything tight, or take a little bit of a rest, load some more weight on, build up from there. And then you have 3 sets where you're doing pretty heavy weight. So it might take like 3 or 4 actual warm-up sets. And then you have 3, that's like 3 to 5 reps. And you're aiming for not failure, but you're aiming to be like, okay, if I had to do 1 more rep of that, that would have been a real big grind and really, really tough. So that's one of them. And I think, from a practical perspective, people say 2 times per week is really the, like the sweet spot for that, because you have to fit it in with your training.
So 2 times per week for the same muscle groups?
2 times per week of just strength training in general. So,
Okay.
and I would say for runners, like, we're not going to do a upper body, lower body split unless you're, have aspirations of being a little bit more of like a bodybuilder and stuff. You're going to do something that's whole body strength training, twice a week. That's what I would do.
You don't do heavy resistance training anymore?
And I don't have weights. I just bought a hex bar, and I've been injured, right? The hip thing has really been not good for doing strength training. But like, for example, like, between podcasts and other things like that, I'll just do, 30 or 40 push-ups in a row. And then, get back to it. So I do a little bit. I was doing some climbing and some other stuff like that, but yeah, it's so minimal compared to what I was actually doing. When I was doing my master's, I was lifting every single day. And I was pretty dang strong. Like I was hex bar deadlifting, I think 395. That was what I got up to at like 155 pounds. So pretty good.
It's totally good. And also, when you spoke about the meta-analysis, the research that was showing the importance of resistance training to improve efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, the need for it to be heavy suggests that there is a neural component to efficiency,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
I totally agree. And I think, by improving, let's get a little speculative here. I think that by improving the ability to recruit fibers more efficiently, more effectively, you actually tune you're kind of like it's like you're tuning a guitar string or something like that. You're getting it closer and closer to in tune, so when you hit that string, it's playing the exact note that you want it to play, as opposed to if it's out of tune, it might be close, but it's gonna potentially be closer to another, or have like a range uh you know of notes that it's trying to hit. Oh yeah, music analogies are not my thing, but um but the bottom line is that you're more effectively able to recruit the amount of muscle fibers that are necessary for the task that's at hand.
That's wild. That's such a simple concept that is so understandable, so easy to comprehend and even visualize as somebody goes from unfamiliar to trained with resistance training, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they're sitting down, like doing a bench press with like barbells, you see their hands are all shaky and it's uncoordinated because those motor units have not been biologically programmed to fire together very well.
Mm-hmm.
That's so interesting. And actually now I literally want to do heavier lifting just because of that. Damn it.
Yeah, you're welcome. No, so this is the great thing about having this podcast, because we talk about all these things and then we're like, oh, I should probably be doing that, and then we can go and implement it, right? So we get to live it. And yeah, like there was like a bunch of Black Friday deals on like hex bars, weights, all that sort of stuff. So I bought, I think, 320 pounds of weights and a hex bar, and I want to get back into doing at least like hex bar deadlifts or farmer's carries or something along those lines that's a little bit heavier, because I do think I could stand to improve. I haven't lifted in that capacity in a really long time. So I think, and so I will be able to improve my neuromuscular system very, very rapidly. And this is like, most people, when they first start lifting, they see improvements for 6 to 8 weeks. And that's not because your muscles are automatically just getting bigger and you're placing down more actin and myosin. You're actually just getting better at recruiting the fibers that you have. And this is something that we need to talk about a little bit more, is this idea, this adaptation idea. And I really think the first thing we do is improve function with the things that are there. And then over time, we start to add structure, right? And this is what you see with people who have lifted for a really long time. They've already maxed out that function, that neural capacity for recruitment. And now they're starting to add structures to it, because the body is trying to adapt to the stresses that are placed upon it. It's the same thing with mitochondrial adaptation. When we do high intensity interval training, 2 weeks of it or 7 sessions of it, no changes or no detectable changes in mitochondrial proteins, mitochondrial size, nothing like that. But we had a 20 to 30% increase in mitochondrial function, the ability for our mitochondria to actually use oxygen with different substrates on board. So that's that. I think that's kind of, like the function improves and then the structure follows that, because of if you extend the stress out long enough.
Yep. And in terms of improvements in strength and power, for most people, those neuromuscular adaptations are going to explain the majority of strength improvements. That we have showers and growers. We all can't grow muscle super effectively. And so for a lot of people, those neuromuscular adaptations really signify or explain the majority of strength improvements. Sadly, like me, I want more muscle, but also I don't know if we truly appreciate the plasticity of even neural recruitment patterns. So I say this because I fully believed everything you just said until I was teaching in North Carolina. And one of my students, he already owned his own CrossFit gym and he looked like it. He was chiseled. He was very, very fit. He came up one day after exercise physiology and he said, I'm going to try this 30-day squatting challenge. What do you think about it? I said, don't do it. I think that's dumb. I think that sounds ridiculous. Like, this was a super fit guy that hadn't been able to increase his squat, what he was squatting for a while, and he wanted to increase it. And it really just sounded to me like an overuse injury or something going to happen. After 30 days, he increased his squat and felt great. And I couldn't believe it because he did it every day. And it was kind of a progressive overload in doing every single day, largely based on, I mean, we didn't do a DEXA scan, or I don't even know if a DEXA scan would actually have the resolution to identify the muscle if built. But I think largely those strength improvements, even though this is a seasoned CrossFitter, right? This is not his first time, but he hadn't been doing that. He hadn't been squatting every single day. And so his ability for neural adaptation, I really think kind of reached that ceiling, and he just wasn't allowing it to detrain, to become unraveled, like throughout the next, because maybe we don't need a quote unquote recovery for the neural component. We need the recovery for the muscular components, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I've also met other people who say, oh, you actually need more recovery for the neural component.
Right, because they say central fatigue takes a longer time to unwind. And so I wonder.
I think too, though, you have to remember what CrossFit is. CrossFit is doing a bunch of different movements. So he could very easily have been getting more efficient at the actual movement itself. Maybe he's improving his squat economy.
Yeah.
The amount of energy that it actually requires for him to move a certain amount of weight, just because you're practicing it every single day. And he obviously didn't overdo it, or else we would see decrements in his performance.
Right.
But yeah, I think no, it's super valuable. And if asked, like, oh, is that the most optimal way to do it? We'd say no. But for some people, I mean, frequency, especially with weight training, it has been shown to be very, very important for continued adaptations. So we won't go down that rabbit hole right now. But I think what I want to bring it back to with the last few minutes is just practical examples. So lift heavy weights and, probably do something that's whole body. If you're concerned about gaining muscle mass, I can assure you.
Don't be.
Exactly.
It's going to help your health. It's going to help your competition. You should want muscle. Want muscle at all costs. Put muscle on your body. If somebody tells you they don't like you with more muscle, smack their mouth. Smack them right in the mouth. Because they're not giving you good advice. You want as much muscle on your body through natural means possible. 100%.
Yep. So don't let that, scare you away. Make sure that, you're building up to it's everything: specificity, consistency, and progression. Strength training is the exact same way. You have to progress from lighter weights if you've never lifted before to heavier and heavier. And it might be one of those things where you just start on machines. Machines are way easier. They're going to put you in the correct movement pattern, and you have a lot less room, or a lot less room for, or you have more room for error, because it's just moving it in one plane essentially. Whereas when you start to do free weights and other things like that, you can get kind of weird tweaks and stuff. So be safe. Try to do some level of whole body strength training twice a week. And it's been shown that the longer you can keep that going. So, if that's, if you do 10 weeks or 12 weeks or 24 weeks, the 24 weeks is probably going to help you a little bit more. Obviously, you're going to run out of the ability to progress at some point. So another thing you can then do is you can lower the weight, but then increase the movement speed. So more power being produced. And you would do the same, sort of movements. Like I said, I really like hex bar deadlift. I think overhead squats, bench press, and then some, squatting motion is also going to be good. But if you don't have access to that, push-ups, pull-ups, lunges, so when you're doing single leg, especially for running, would be really good. And weight those up a little bit. You'd be surprised at how strong your legs actually are. And then again, maybe some deadlift motion, because you have to get the front of your legs and the back of your legs. That's why I like hex bar deadlift, because it's kind of a mixture of the two. So if and when you start to plateau with that, you can introduce some power training. And this is, we're not getting specific because, you would change this based on the time of year and other things like that. If you start, plateauing with that, you can switch to plyometrics. So hops and jumps and other things like that, but don't do it inappropriately. Inappropriate plyometrics look like this. You get a box, it's 20 inches off the ground, and you just do as many box jumps until you fail. You just turn those box jumps into an endurance workout, and you totally missed what the purpose of those plyometrics are. The purpose of those plyometrics are to jump as forcefully as you possibly can, create as much power as you possibly can, because that's what we're trying to put our body in a stress that is so different from what we normally do, that the only thing that it can do is adapt to it. And you stand to make the most adaptations by the things you do the least of. So those plyometrics, it's like maybe one or two, like you step off a box and then you jump as high as you can, and then you rest for 30 seconds to a minute. Like seriously, it is that boring, but that's what you have to do initially. Because if you're generating that much force and power, then you really, really have to try to continue to maintain that quality rather than quantity. And by resting, that's what you're going to be doing. It's the same thing with heavy strength training. You need to rest a decent amount of time. 3 to 5 minutes is normally, what the recommendation is. Same thing with power stuff, because you're trying to maintain quality, and we're not worried about quantity. You get enough quantity out on the trails, on the bike erg, other things like that. So the big thing, if you're trying to improve economy and efficiency, is you need to lift heavy weights or move it really fast or jump really hard. Maybe I'll talk with, one of the coaches who comes on the podcast, and we'll actually give you some more tangible, sort of, this is actually what we would plan. But I think we'll leave it there. I think that's what the literature is telling us. And, the good news is that you can improve your economy, and it's, you don't even have to measure it. You just have to, start to implement, some of that heavy lifting, continue to progress in terms of your volume and stay consistent over time. And, your economy should improve.
Yeah. When you were just talking, I was just thinking about all the things I need to do in my life. I need to do that. I need to do that more. I need to change that. Oh.
Mm-hmm. I know it's an ever growing list of things that I know I should do, and then an ever growing list of things that I actually can do and put into practice. So, you like I said, you don't have to take all of these. These are just recommendations. I certainly am getting kind of amped to start to do more heavy strength training, and doing something's better than nothing in terms of that. As long as your body can absorb that stress and adapt to it. Because that's the last thing we want to do, is give a recommendation on here, have somebody go and overdo it, and then get injured and not be able to stay consistent. So just make sure that you can fit it into your training plan before you actually go and do it.
Yeah. Like you said, all explosive movement activities, exercises should be done in an unfatigued state. The more fatigued you are, you're going to increase the risk of injury. One thing, do you do kettlebell workouts?
I have one. Yeah.
I must have moved out of the country when the kettlebell craze happened, because I missed its inception. And that is something that I'm interested in at this stage of my life, and maybe incorporating more. Is it an accurate statement to say that kettlebell workouts are a little bit more applied than general resistance training?
I think it depends, because
I guess it depends on how you're doing it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because you could make a kettlebell workout
the same,
pretty aerobic. You could also get really heavy kettlebells and do really cool movements like dumbbell push presses, or not dumbbell, but kettlebell push presses, kettlebell snatches are really, really cool. And what the cool thing about that is that since the kettlebell kind of moves it with your hand, it conforms to your movement pattern a little bit better. Yeah, it's, if you want a challenge, get a really, really heavy kettlebell and try to do some kettlebell swings. That is taking you for a ride. But it's yeah, I don't know. I don't know too much. I know it developed over, I think it's like Russian. Like the kettlebell movement kind of got developed over in Russia. Then some people brought it over here, and then it started to get big. But yeah, I have a kettlebell. They're really nice for like unilateral movements too. Like, for example, you could hold one by your side and be walking. That's called a suitcase carry. So you'd be contracting essentially all of your abdominal and stabilizer musculature on one side by holding it on the other. Then you'd switch it and you'd go the other way. The challenge is that you would just need a heavy enough kettlebell, to make it actually start to improve your economy, if that's really what you're trying to use strength training for.
And also, I wonder if people would ask how flexibility and flexibility training may influence efficiency economy.
If you're doing proper strength training, and this is just my opinion, you should not need to do flexibility training. The most flexible I have ever been is when I was the strongest in going through full range of motion during my strength training. And I think, so if you are too flexible, so for example, if you're one of those people who can like pull their forehead to their knees, you actually stand to lose a little bit of economy, because, if you think about it as like a rubber band that is tighter and more taut is going to snap back better and apply that force a little bit better than something that's been stretched a ton and is actually pretty loose. So, you have to remember, running is a series of hops from one leg to another. So you have to be able to transfer that energy quickly. So I generally stay away, from just purely static stretching. If it's something that's enjoyable to you, just don't put it at the beginning of your run. And that's totally fine. Just know that, if you are super, super, super flexible, you might be going the opposite way in terms of optimizing your run performance. There's still a lot of talk of flexibility is still good. But yeah, I don't normally do it too much.
That's hilarious. I hate stretching. One, I'm pathologically inflexible, and so I'm terrible at it. Right. So I just loved how you're like, hey, if you think it's fun, then go ahead.
Nope, don't find it fun.
No, not at all. Although I always tell myself when I retire, I'm going to make yoga a part of my life.
You're going to turn into a yogi on a beach somewhere with a Speedo, and I'm not going to want to visualize that at all.
It will be wonderful.
You'll be so relaxed.
Yeah. Actually, I don't want to see myself in a Speedo now, let alone when I get older. Nobody needs to see that.
Nope. I guess we'll leave you guys with that. Robbie, do you have anything to leave the audience with today?
Team Altman.
Team Altman. All right. Well, we'll leave you guys with that. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.